Hi folks, welcome back to the Tabletop's Edge and our tutorial series on World in Flames Collector's Edition. Last time out, we looked at the air rules, focusing on how air combat works, and today we are going to take a look at all of the other air missions besides those that are directly involved in air combat. So a lot to go over today. With that said, let's go ahead and dive right in and take a look at these. The first mission we're going to look at is the ground strike mission. Ground strike missions are flown in the ground strike missions step of the action phase. And to be eligible to fly a ground strike mission, an aircraft needs to have a tactical factor, which is the factor in the lower left-hand corner there. In order to fly the mission, you simply take the aircraft, select any legal target hex within the bomber's normal range, in this case 4 for the Stuka, move the aircraft to that hex, and resolve any potential air combat. For this particular tutorial, we will sort of dispense with air combat since we showed you how that worked last time, just to keep the video a little shorter and to keep things moving along. So any bombers that then survive the air combat are then go on to do the ground strike mission itself. The ground strike mission requires you to roll the tactical value or less on 1d10 in order to invert the target, and the ground strike will attack every target that is in the hex, and they'll do so individually. So in this particular example, the Stuka would roll 3 times, looking for a 6 or less each time in order to invert the units in the hex. Now, since the Soviets have a bomber here, the bomber is not eligible to come up to intercept the Stuka. It cannot fly since this is the Axis ground strike mission step. So they are just as vulnerable as the 2 land units to being ground struck. You'll find that flying ground strike missions against your opponent's bombers is an excellent way to keep them from interfering with your attacks later on in the impulse. One other thing to keep in mind is aircraft with extended ranges. This Ju-88 has a normal range of 6, however, the orange arrow indicates that it is capable of flying extended range missions. Extended range doubles the printed range, so it is able to fly missions out to 12 hexes away. However, any mission flown from 7 to 12 hexes, anything more than its normal range, the tactical factor on the aircraft is halved. So if the Ju-88 was flying to this hex from more than 6 hexes away, the 5 would be halved to 2.5, rounds to 3. They would need a 3 or less in order to hit each of the targets in the hex. If they were flying from 6 hexes or closer, they would be able to use their full tactical value of 5. Now, once a unit completes its ground strike mission, it returns to base and it is turned face down. Now, let's take a look at how ground support works. Ground support missions are flown during the land combat step of the action phase, and they are flown to hexes against which you have declared an attack earlier in the land combat step. The purpose is to add the tactical factors of the bombers to the ground factors of your attacking ground units. So, as a simple example here, we have 2 German units that have declared an attack against the Soviet forces in Kiev. Using the ground factors, it is currently 16 to 9, which would round to I think it's a 3-2 attack on the land combat charts. However, that's not a great attack to make, so the Germans would like to improve from 3-2 and see if they can get something better. Fortunately, they have a couple of bombers nearby that are within range, and during the land combat resolution process, they decide to fly both of these bombers to the Soviet hex as a ground support mission. Again, you would resolve any air combat that might arise because of this, and the surviving bombers would then be able to participate in the land attack flying their ground support mission. Assuming we have no air combat, and we're going to assume this Soviet bomber is not here for the moment, you would simply add the tactical values of the aircraft to the attacking ground unit's strength. So in this case, the German attack becomes 16 plus 11, 27 to 9 defending factors, all of a sudden the 3-2 attack goes up to the 3-1 column. So you can see where ground support missions can really kind of be a force multiplier for your land units. A couple things to keep in mind. First, you can never add more factors of ground support than you have actual ground factors attacking. So if we were to remove the armor core and we had 8 factors attacking 9 defending factors, you can still fly both of these bombers to the hex. However, instead of adding all 11 ground support factors, you would only be able to add up to 8 factors because that's the number of ground factors you have attacking. And again, remember with World in Flames, any modifiers like attack strengths or factors being halved or doubled, etc., you carry those all the way through. And that's going to apply to the ground support factors as well. Now, assuming the Soviets did have this bomber in Kiev and it had not been turned face down by a ground strike earlier in the impulse, then when the Germans fly their ground support, the Soviets will have an opportunity to announce that they are going to fly their bomber as ground support as well. And going back to last episode about air combat, since there are no aircraft that are flying intercept, escort, or combat air patrol missions in this hex, all 3 bombers would be cleared through. So the Germans would have 16 plus 11 for a total of 27, but now the Soviets would have 9 plus 2 for a total of 11, and the attack becomes 27-11 or 2-1. Again, after the ground support mission is flown, usually right before the combat resolution die roll, you will rebase your aircraft and they will be turned face down. Now, in the Soviets situation, in this particular example, if they thought there was a good chance that Kiev would fall, they would probably not want to rebase their bombers to Kiev. They would probably want to rebase them further back here where they'd be a little safer just in case the Germans rule well and end up taking the hex. Another thing to keep in mind for both ground support and ground strike is that certain terrain will modify the tactical factors of the aircraft. So if instead the Soviets were in the forest hex here, forest halves the tactical factors of any aircraft flying missions there. So the Stuka would become a 3 and the Ju-88 would become a 2.5. Now, if you're flying a ground strike mission, that 2.5 would round to 3. So both aircraft would need to roll a 3 or less to successfully ground strike and turn face down any of the units in the hex. Instead, if it was flying a ground support mission, you would retain that 2.5 until you got all the way to the end of the combat strength calculations, at which point only at the very last step would you round that 0.5 up. Now, let's take a look at some of the other missions that involve Naval Air. We're going to take a look at Naval Air missions here. Naval Air missions are flown in the Naval Air missions step of the action phase, which comes right after the port attack step and right before naval movement. Now, who is eligible to fly a Naval Air mission? That would be any aircraft with a Naval Air factor, which is the factor in the upper right here, as well as fighters. So let's take a little bit closer look here. The Germans have several aircraft based here in Brest, and in order to fly a Naval Air mission during the Naval Air step, you simply count from the aircraft's base to a hex dot, any hex dot that is within the sea zone. So we're looking at the Bay of Biscay here. Any of these hex dots would allow the aircraft to fly a mission into the sea zone. So with the fighters based here, say at Saint-Nazaire, and the 2 bombers at Brest, you simply count 1 hex and you're in a C dot. They will then enter one of the C boxes that are located in the C zone. And the range cost to enter the boxes is equal to the number on the box, but they are cumulative. So in order to enter the 0 box, you simply need to spend 1 range point and then place the unit into the 0 box. In order for a Stuka based here at Brest to reach the 1 box, he would pay 1 to get to the C dot, and then a second 1 to enter the 1, which means in order to enter the 2 box, he would spend 1 to enter the C dot, 2 for the 1 box, and then 2 more for a total of 4 to get to the 2 box. So with his 4 range, he is only able to make it to the 2 box in the Bay of Biscay. The Ju-88s, if they want to fly at a full strength of 2, they would have a range of 6. They would be able to make it to the 2 box as well. However, it cost 7 range to make it to the 3 box. So they're unable to make it to the 3 box. However, if they decide to fly an extended range mission, they now have a range of 12, which will allow them to go 1 into the C zone, 2, 4, 7, 11, and you would signify extended range by just placing the aircraft upside down like so. Extended range works just the same as it does for the ground strike and ground support missions. The naval air factor would be halved. So instead of 2 naval air factors, it would have a single naval air factor, and it would be in the 4 box. Now, unlike just about every other aircraft mission type, when an aircraft flies a naval air mission, it does not immediately return to base. Instead, it will remain in this C box until it is either aborted due to combat, or you voluntarily abort it, or the end of the turn, at which point it will rebase. Now, it's important to know that you do not have to be located on the coast in order to fly a naval air mission. You can fly a naval air mission from inland hexes as well. Were the bomber located, say, here, you would simply count your land hexes until you got to your first C dot. So in this case, it would be 1, 2, 3. It would cost them 4 to get to the 1 box, 6 to get to the 2 box, 9 to get to the 3 box, or 13 to get to the 4 box, which even at extended range would be too far for the Ju-88s. Fighters work the exact same way. You can see this German Bf-109 has a range of 3, so he would be able to go 1, 2, but because of his short range, he's unable to get into any of the C boxes other than the 0 or the 1 box. Once out in the C boxes, the aircraft would be eligible to conduct naval searches just as if they were a naval ship, and we'll cover all of that in the naval combat tutorial that's coming up after we finish the air rules. So for now, just understand that the naval air missions are different because you will be flying to a box. The range required to reach the boxes is cumulative for the box numbers, as well as however much range it takes you to reach that first C dot in that C zone. And once you're in the boxes, you stay in the boxes until the end of the turn or the aircraft aborts. Now, there is one other mission called a Naval Air Interception, and this occurs during the naval combat step, and it's a case of an actual naval battle occurring in the C zone. Just like air units with air combat can intercept interceptors, etc., each side will have an opportunity, once the naval forces have searched and found one another, prior to the start of the battle, both sides will have an opportunity to fly any aircraft units into the C zone on a naval air mission, which means you would be able to sort of reinforce your fleets at sea with any aircraft nearby. What this does is it allows you to keep your aircraft units available rather than committing them ahead of time to the battle. The only catch is that when you use the Naval Air Interception mission, your range is halved, rounded up, of course. So you get extra flexibility, but your aircraft are unable to reach some of these higher boxes. In the case of the bombers we've been looking at, the Stuka would have a range of 2. If he's on the coast, that's great because he can still go 1, 2, and get into the 1 box. He won't be able to reach the 2 box. For the Ju-88, he can still fly at extended range, which is 12, but then that is halved down to 6. So he would be 1, 2, 3, 4. He would only be able to get to the 2 box, and he would be considered at extended range. Other than that, the Naval Air interception mission works just like the Naval Air mission. It just occurs in a different step, and your range is halved. Now let's take a look at what missions are available for air transports. There are 3 missions that air transport units can fly that no other aircraft units can fly. They are the paradrop, the air transport, and the air resupply missions. We're going to start off by looking at the paradrop mission. Now, the ATR, it can be identified by a white range circle as well as the aircraft facing the bottom of the hex. And on the back, it has a white plan view of the aircraft facing down. To fly a paradrop mission, the air transport can carry any paratroop unit, either a corps or a division, if you're using the division optional rule. They must start the step stacked together. And in that case, you pick any legal target hex within the full range of the aircraft, in this case 5 hexes. You fly the aircraft to the target hex. Let's say they're going to drop on Kiev here. Then your opponent has an opportunity to fly interceptors. You would resolve any air combat. Any air transports that survive that would then paradrop their cargo in the hex, and they would return to base and be turned face down. Now, the paradrop mission is flown in the paradrop step, which occurs immediately prior to the land combat step of the turn. The idea here, if there are any enemy units in the target hex, the paratroopers will have to fight them. However, they will be able to add their strength to any attacking land units in the following land combat step. Now, you do not need to fly a paradrop mission to a hex occupied by enemy units. You can fly a paradrop mission to any hex that the cargo is legal to enter. So in this case, instead of flying and dropping directly on Kiev, the air transport could instead fly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes, and it could conduct a paradrop mission here, at which point, assuming it survived any air combat, it would return to base, and the paradrop would then, the paratroop unit would then have to fight a combat against any notional units potentially in that hex during the land combat phase. Now, the other type of mission, or the second type of mission that a air transport can fly, is the air transport mission. This differs from a paradrop in that the unit is not necessarily paradropping onto an enemy-controlled hex. It is being transported to a friendly-controlled hex, and it need not be a paratrooper. The air transports can carry any paratrooper or mountain unit of either size. So again, if you're using the divisions optional rule, you could the air transport can transport mountain divisions or mountain corps, as well as paratroop corps. And again, the paratroop or the air transport flies with the cargo to the target hex, fights any potential air combat there, unloads the cargo, and then returns to base. Now, in this case, with air transport, it's possible for the enemy to intercept and engage in combat in the target hex here or in the return to base hex, because it's possible with an air transport to transport units that are not stacked with the aircraft at the beginning of the step. So in other words, the aircraft would be capable of flying out to the target hex. As long as it can be based in that target hex, it can then load up the cargo and then fly and return to base in another hex. Now, if the paratroopers were here in the swamp hex, because the stacking limit for aircraft is 0 in swamp hexes, the air transports would not be able to fly to this hex, pick them up, and then transport them somewhere else. So you can see this is a good way to quickly move your lighter units, your paratroops and your mountain units from one hex to another hex. Now the aircraft can either start loaded or it can start unloaded. If it's unloaded, it will pick up the unit in the first target hex, be subject to combat, and then fly them either back to where it came from, or it could fly it then onto another hex where they would be subject to air combat yet again, and they would unload and remain in this final hex here. It's important to remember that while the air transport unit, the aircraft itself, is turned down at the end of face down at the end of the mission, its cargo is not turned face down unless it started the step out of supply. So just because the air transport is finished for the turn, barring any reorganization, the cargo can then continue to move in any future impulses. That is the air transport mission. The third mission that is available to air transports and air transports only is the air resupply. This mission works essentially like reorganization from headquarters units. The air transport flies to a target hex anywhere within its normal range, and for each air transport that flies the mission, it can then reorganize or turn face up any one unit in that hex. It is subject to enemy air interception at the target hex. So if the Germans needed to get the Armor Corps reorganized and they had an air transport nearby, they could fly to the hex. The Soviets would then have an opportunity to fly defenders to intercept them. There would be an air combat battle. If the transport survived, they would then reorganize or resupply the ground troops, and then they would return to base and be turned face down. Now let's take a look at the strategic bombardment mission. Actually, before we move on to strategic bombardment, let's circle back and talk about the port attacks mission. Now, the port attacks mission requires aircraft that have a Naval Air factor, which is in the upper right-hand corner of the counter. And it occurs as the first in the port attack step of the action phase. So it's the first step of the action phase. As you can see, we have 2 Italian Naval Air units stationed here. And in order to fly a port attack mission, you simply declare the mission and take the aircraft. They can select any port within their full range, and they fly to the port, and then a naval air combat ensues. So in this case, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 5 hexes for both of these aircraft to reach the French fleet here at Marseille. The Italians would be able to fly in here, and they would conduct a naval air combat. And again, we will get into the procedure of a naval air combat in a later tutorial. After the port attack is resolved, the aircraft will then return to base and be turned face down. Now, it's important to keep in mind that while only units with a Naval Air factor can fly a port attack mission, it is entirely possible for a fighter to fly an escort mission for the aircraft that are flying the Naval Air mission. So this Falco 1 has a range of 5. He too can fly as an escort, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hexes away. So all 3 of these aircraft would be participating in a port attack. However, technically, the fighter here is flying an escort mission. And those escort missions can accompany any type of bomber mission. So ground support, ground strike, strategic bombardment. Even though the fighter doesn't have the factors, he's not flying that type of mission. Remember, mission is really all about the role that that aircraft unit is flying at that particular moment. So just because you have port attack going on, it doesn't mean that those aircraft have to go in unescorted or unprotected. Now, having taken a look at how the port attack missions work, and you'll see it's a very similar mechanism to the ground support and ground strike. A lot of these carry from mission type to mission type. There's the same basic way that aircraft units work. So I hope you're starting to see that and understand that it's just what their particular target is, or what they're specifically trying to do, that really determines which mission they're flying. For instance, a ground strike mission is there to invert a unit and turn it face down. Ground support is just adding to the attack, whereas a port strike or a naval air mission would be participating in a naval combat. Now, let's take a look at the last type of combat mission that's available to aircraft, and then we'll wrap it up with the rebase mission at the end. Strategic bombardment missions, unlike all of the other combat missions, do not attack enemy units. Rather, they attack enemy factories and oil resources. So, eligible targets for strategic bombardment missions are any hex with a printed factory in it or an oil resource. Now, note that you cannot bomb general resources here, only the oil resources. And I guess the justification for that is that the oil resources represent either the oil wells or the refining facilities that happen to be a concentrated target, as opposed to the much more dispersed industries that are and mines that are using the general resources. Now, who's eligible to fly a strategic bombardment mission? You guessed it. Any aircraft that has a strategic factor, and that is the factor in the lower right-hand corner of the counter. So in this case, the B-17Gs here have a strategic factor of 6. Now, just by way of example, all of these American aircraft that are in this stack are eligible to fly strategic bombardment missions. And this is to kind of illustrate, again, what I'm talking about, how the aircraft units have a lot of flexibility. It's not the type of aircraft, rather it's the presence of a strategic factor that determines whether or not they can fly this mission. So we have a big 4-engine heavy bomber. It's a land bomber that has a nice strategic factor of 6. We have a smaller twin-engine land bomber that still has a decent factor of 3 that can fly strategic bombardment missions. Here we have a Naval Air unit, which is denoted by the angled artwork on the counter. It has a strategic bombardment factor of 2, so it is eligible to fly strategic bombardment missions, even though it's primarily a Naval Air unit. And even these P-40 fighter aircraft, they have, it may only be one, but that's all you need to be eligible to fly a strategic bombardment mission. So you've got these fighters. Now, the Americans would probably be much better off if this fighter were flying an escort mission for these bombers, since its air-to-air value is much better than its strategic bombardment value. However, if you are scraping and searching the map board looking for just that one last little strategic bombardment factor to push you into a higher column for your attack, well, these guys may just be the ones that are available and that you can use. So how does the strategic bombardment actually work? Well, similar to every other combat mission we've discussed, you select a target hex that is within the range of the aircraft. You'll fly your aircraft out there. We'll go through the whole air combat subroutine where the opposing player has an opportunity to fly interceptors, and you can fly escorts and intercept the interceptors, etc. After the air combat is resolved, you'll then have any surviving bombers will total their strategic factors, and you will consult the strategic bombardment table. In this case, we've got 6 and 3 is 9, 11, a total of 12 strategic bombardment factors. Those go over to the strategic bombardment table. Let's take a look at that right now. The strategic bombardment table is found here on the combat charts folder, and you can see across the top here, we've got columns broken down by the number of strategic bombardment factors in the attack, and die roll results going down the left side. You simply find the relevant column. In our case, there were 12 strategic bombardment factors, so that's going to put us on the 10 to 13 column, and you roll 1d10. In this case, it was a 7. You cross-index the 7 with the column you're in, and you'll find a number 2. This is the number of production points or oil resources that are lost from that hex due to this attack for this turn. You'll see some results have some asterisks here. If you're playing with Classic, just ignore the asterisks. Those basically tell you how many factories have been destroyed. So unless you're playing with the factory destruction optional rule, just ignore the asterisks. It is possible also to get a +1 to the die roll if it is a low altitude day mission and there was no air-to-air combat. So if the bombers go in basically unharassed by enemy interceptors, they've got a better chance of doing some damage, and that's reflected by giving them a +1. So let's go back to the map and cover a couple things about how you implement the results. In this case, we rolled a 2. Now, as mentioned, after the completion of the strategic bombardment attack, the bombers or all the aircraft involved in the mission would return to base and be turned face down. Now, we mentioned the 2 result. What does that mean? Well, that is the number of production points that are lost this turn in that hex. Now, it's important to understand that it's production points and not build points. We'll talk about those when we get to the production tutorial, but just know that production points are multiplied by a nation's production multiple to give you a total number of build points, which are then what you actually spend on your unit. So be sure that you're not subtracting build points when conducting strategic bombardment missions. Usually well, at least early in the war, production point hit will be less damaging than losing actual build points because of the production multiples. Now, you also have to keep in mind that you cannot lose more production points than you have production points in that hex. And in the case of Dortmund, you see 2 factory stacks, which means that up to 2 production points can be created in that hex during the production step of this turn. If instead we had been bombing Hanover here with a single factory stack, the Germans would not have suffered 2 production point losses. They would only have suffered a single production point loss because that's all that is produced in that particular hex. If we move a little bit further to the east, you can see Berlin has 3 stacks, meaning that if Berlin is attacked, the Germans could lose up to 3 production points from strategic bombardment. And again, same thing goes with the oil resources. That would be a maximum of 1 loss if the Allies were to bomb that oil resource. Now, if you have a situation where you have a factory stack and an oil resource in the same hex, and you inflict losses on that hex, the order in which the losses are taken off are factories and then oil resources. So if you had 1 factory stack and 1 oil resource in the same hex, and you inflicted, you got a result of 1 from the strategic bombardment table, then the enemy nation would lose 1 production point. They wouldn't lose the oil, because oil has some non-production uses, as you've seen in the extended playthrough that we've been doing, if you've been watching that. That pretty much covers it for strategic bombardment. Let's talk about one more air mission that's available to air units, and then we'll kind of have wrapped everything up. But before we do that, I do want to mention that rain and snow weather will have strategic factors of any aircraft flying those missions. Weather also, rain and snow will also affect really any other bombing missions. So ground strike, it will have them. Ground support, it has them. Terrain will affect ground support and ground strike, but weather will affect pretty much everything. And as a reminder, the weather effects chart lists which missions are affected by what types of weather. So keep in mind when you're flying your missions to always modify the relevant factors by weather and terrain. Now let's take a look at air rebase. All right, the last type of air mission that's available to aircraft is an air rebase, and it does exactly what it sounds like it does. This is how you are able to move your aircraft around the map without engaging in combat and without using rail movement or naval transport. You simply pick up the aircraft and you move it from where it is currently based to any other legal hex where it can stack within double its printed range. So for the Soviet TB3s here with a range of 11, you can pick any hex within 22 hexes of where it's located and place it there. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22. You could place them from Kryvyi Rog all the way up here to Murmansk or Karelia. So you can see with the long-range aircraft, you can really get aircraft quite a long ways across the map. Also, where air rebase missions differ from any other mission is that the aircraft stays face up after it completes the air rebase. So if you just wanted to move this unit from here to here as an air rebase, perfectly legal, he would not be turned face down. He would remain face up and is still eligible to fly air missions in future impulses. For aircraft with extended range, like the DB3s, they can rebase up to quadruple their printed. So essentially they can fly an extended range and then double the extended range, which in practical terms, you just multiply the printed number by 4. So the DB3s can rebase even farther than the TB3s. They were limited to 22 hexes. The DB3 can rebase up to 28 hexes. And if an aircraft flies over friendly hexes or sea dots in sea areas without any enemy combat units like surface combat ships or carriers or enemy fighters, they can rebase up to triple their printed distance. So for air units in the Soviet Union, these TB3s could in fact, if they were to fly over friendly controlled territory to another hex, could rebase up to 33 hexes. Now, the one catch with air rebases is that they are limited by the number of air missions that you can fly. So if you are doing an air action as your action type, then rebasing the aircraft is unlimited. However, if you're doing a naval, land, or combined, it will count as a mission just as much as any ground strikes or naval air or port attacks that you may do. So air rebases are a nice way to get aircraft into position, especially as the front tends to move. Air units that the Germans show up, will build throughout the course of the turn, will show up in Germany. You can see they are going to be out of range of just about everything once the Germans start invading the Soviet Union. So you'll be using those air rebases to get your units into position where they can do some good for you. Another thing to note about air rebase missions is that they cannot be intercepted by the enemy. So every other type of air mission is subject to interception at the target hex, and in the case of air transport missions, also in the return to base hex. But air rebases, you're able to move your aircraft across the map without any danger of enemy interference. And that pretty much finishes up all of the air rules. Now, keep in mind, there are a tremendous number of optional rules in World in Flames that affect the air game and what air units can do, and I haven't gotten into any of those because we're going to save those for the optional rule episodes of the tutorial. So what you've seen here is essentially the classic version. It's the basic version. Hopefully you've noticed that air missions have a certain kind of basic structure in selecting the target within range. There's a process where the enemy has a procedure to potentially intercept them with air units of their own. You work through that, you fly the mission, and then you immediately return to base and are turned face down. There are a few exceptions to the immediate return to base and being turned face down, notably naval air missions where you stay out in the sea box, and air rebase where you do not have to be turned face down and you're not subject to enemy air interception. So with that, next episode, we're going to start to take a look at the last of the three major elements of the game, and that would be the naval system. We'll look at naval movement and then get into naval combat, and then finally we'll wrap up with, it's probably going to be 3 or 4 episodes on the end of turn stage, because there's a lot that goes on there, everything from U.S. entry to production to conquest. So thanks for sticking with us so far through the tutorial series. We're making some progress, and hopefully we'll get this wrapped up in the next few weeks. And any questions or comments you may have, go ahead and put them in the comment section below. I'll try and address those. Thanks for watching today, and we'll see you next time.